afternoon, witches, warlocks, sorcerers, adepts, friends, fans, family, and followers to Season 5, Episode 16 of the hit underground occult radio show known as Knights of the Nephilim, brought to you by Celestial Oddities Radio and the Coterie of Samil Arcane Occult Order. As always, I will be your host and guide on this journey into magic and mysticism, darkness and divination. I am Frater Crow. It's a pleasure to have you listening in today. Whether you're listening live, streaming after the fact, or you've downloaded us to your device for on the go, I do want to thank you for your patronage and support. Make sure you click the like, share, follow, and subscribe buttons on whatever platforms you're tuning in from. Helps move us up the podcast community rankings, allows more people to discover the show, keeps you in the loop with new episodes as they air, and gives you unfiltered access to our past archives. Not only of this show, Knights of the Nephilim, based upon esoteric science and occult doctrine, magical mechanics and ritual practice, but our other shows as well. Paranormal Guys Podcast, deep diving into subject matter of paranormal and supernatural phenomena. Uncovering the underground, interviewing comedians, hip-hop artists, bands, and so forth across the world. Or it be one of our shows like Last Call, unfiltered, unrelenting, and unapologetic life stories. And lastly, Caniculum Obscuritatis, teaching you how to build a practice from the ground up. We have so much for so many people out there, so hopefully you enjoy the shows, share them around, and click those buttons. For those that like watching live, our episodes do air live, and it allows you to comment during the show, visualize and watch the show, and that is available on YouTube, the Knights of the Nephilim page, where it'll be permanently housed. It's also available on the Frater Crow, Knights of the Nephilim, Coterie of Samil, and Celestial Oddities Radio Facebook pages, where they are kept there for 30 days until Facebook removes the live videos. That is for anybody that likes to watch live. After the episodes air, we do upload them each and every episode to a slew of different platforms: Spotify, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, Deezer, Castbox, Amazon, Google, Apple. So listen wherever you like. Some people like the live, they like the visuals. Some people like the after the fact, just audio streaming. Either one's absolutely fine. We do ask that if you would like to be a part of the show, we would love to have you. Feel free to leave comments. Feel free to tune in. I'm giving you my normal spiel, but I'm about to kind of throw that off a little bit just because of the fact of what's going on today. So I will say welcome back to Knights of the Nephilim. Today's episode is not business as usual. This is a special episode, a final episode, and quite possibly the final time this current speaks through this channel. For 7 years, we've walked the borderlands between history and myth, spirit and psychology, angels and adversaries, possession, initiation, the sacred and the forbidden. And if there was ever a guest suited for the closing of this gate, it is Sean Woodward. Sean Woodward is an author, visionary artist, musician whose work carries the weight of true depth. From Archonics to Typhonian Rites of Amenta to Keys to the Hoodoo Kingdom, the Grimoire of ZAL, Erzulie of the Deep, and the Infernal Faces of Hekate. His creations don't merely entertain, they initiate. He has spoken at major conferences across the occult and creative world and has been described as a poet of the global village, a new Renaissance man, and an unmistakable authority. But labels aside, what matters most is this: Sean's work speaks to the part of you that remembers. So tonight, we're not just talking about books, we're talking about the machinery behind reality, the spirits behind masks, and the keys hidden in myth, poetry, and rites. And if this is the final Knights of the Nephilim, then let it be a worthy ending. Let's go ahead and begin. So light your candles, put on your ceremonial attire, grab your wands and anathemas, and focus your desire as we step into the circle and conjure the man that is Sean Woodward.
For the introduction.
Absolutely, brother. How you doing?
I'm doing good, thank you.
Very excited to have you on. I appreciate you joining us, especially for this this last broadcast.
Yeah, I'm honored to be in such a position.
Absolutely. No, I've been a fan of your work for a long time. You've done such great work in so many different medium platforms, from obviously your books to your music to the comics to everything that you've been a part of. You are a man of many talents, and it's been an honor to watch things come out over the years and the influence that you've had on the occult community.
Thank you. It's good to know that the work gets appreciated.
Absolutely. No, it certainly does, brother. And we're going to dive into that tonight. I know some of the listeners out there are certainly going to have questions. So if you have questions out there, guys, don't be afraid to drop it. We'll throw them on the screen. We'll read them off. Be a part of this last broadcast. Let's have a fun time together. First question I want to jump into, Sean, is what is the real function of the Archons in your worldview? Are they jailers, parasites, cosmic bureaucrats, or something even stranger?
I think it's kind of a mixture, and it depends really sort of how you approach them, whether you come from a sort of classical Gnostic viewpoint, or you come from an experiential viewpoint, and I think the view of them differs accordingly with those trajectories. Generally speaking, they essentially are jailers. They're kind of almost enforcing the crazy will of the demiurge in the Gnostic sense. But then they also have this sort of very otherworldly aspect. And it's kind of that aspect that I've built into my Leng Mythos trilogy, where the Archonics and Archonics started out as that sort of Gnostic platform and understanding. But then, as I went deeper into it, I could see that they were sort of totally alien to our universe and the fabric of space. And so there is this story within the story of how they come into this dimension and cause the destruction of it, not purely out of malintent, but just by their nature. Their nature is such that it has that effect.
No, that's understandable, and it's interesting because my viewpoint of the Archons from years ago till now has certainly shaped itself out as well, just through practice, through time, and being able to sit with those concepts. Where at one point in time it was absolute, Gnostic, anti-demiurgic, anti-archonic, feel to it. We must escape to understanding them at a much deeper level. And as you said, it's not necessarily out of malice or maliciousness that they do what they do. It's they are so alien to our world that their influence just does what it does within our world. It's very integral to our world. It's here. We have ways of combating that, but their energy is just what helps make up this matrix that we're in.
Very much so, yes.
Now, in speaking of that, do we think that they are external predation, internal psychology, or do you think, as you kind of alluded to, kind of an interesting hybrid system of maybe both?
Yeah, I think in reality it's probably hybrid. Certainly initially the manifestation is external. It's not just a psychological construct. But then we have to remember all the time that we're filtering everything through our senses and through our understandings and the frameworks we've built into our natures, and so that can still have a kind of filter on things.
Absolutely. Our filter, really does shape our world. Nothing is true. Everything is permitted. So we take in these influences and we allow it to shape, how we see the world and everybody. And that's what's so interesting about reality. And a lot of times I'm sure you guys listening out there can ponder on this for a moment, but we tend to think that all of our neighbors, our friends and family all see the world similar. We have different views, but we see it. No, some of us are in completely alien worlds compared to one another, just because of our depth of understanding or lack thereof. And how we've learned to filter some of these ideas and higher conceptualizations into our framework. And it's just very interesting that we share an experience, but doesn't mean we're really sharing the same experience.
That's it precisely. Yeah, it's and as you say, many times we make assumptions that other people understand the same things we do in the same ways we do. And I think when I was very young, sort of early teenager, that was something I had to learn very quickly because things I took for granted and to me were perfectly normal, like being able to, use a tarot deck to divine things, very quickly got me into trouble because I soon realized that, it could have a shocking effect on people when you were right and they couldn't understand how you could know things they didn't. But also, the society around it and authority had just got no time for that kind of thing. So I learned very young that, to a degree, you have to hide stuff. Obviously, culture has gotten a little bit better over the years. But this is one of the reasons I spent decades, out of the limelight, so to speak, because I was very conscious of the impact it could have.
I can imagine, because as you said, and I know from your past, that you were advanced at your age as a younger child, that you started to really perceive things a lot quicker than those around you. And as you've seen into hidden worlds that most either don't know exist or they turn their back on. And I know one of the things that I found fascinating, reading your works, is your talks about how quickly you were able to read Crowley's work and it made sense to you young. Whereas there's many adults that read it still to this day that it's like you got to read it again and again to really absorb what it is he's saying, what he's teaching, and be able to put that in and implement that into your practice. You had made mention in some of your different books, I think you spoke about it in Keys to the Hoodoo Kingdom, that you were able to just read it and it hit. So you were understanding concepts that were well beyond your age range at a younger age.
Absolutely. I mean, I think I was probably 12 or 13 when I first read Crowley's Confessions. Around the same time, Kenneth Grant's Magickal Revival had just come out, Cults of the Shadow not long after. And also Crowley's The Magical Record, the B666. And yeah, I very quickly had an appreciation to the point where I was trying to track down through kind of inter-library loan systems in this country other works of Crowley's. I was handwriting out copies of his Libers. So,
wow,
I would borrow the book Magic in the one tome it was then that Grant and Simmons edited. I'd be writing out the Libers because I could only borrow it from the library for so long. And likewise, the first tarot deck I had was a photocopy of the trump cards out of the Book of Thoth. And I glued them to card kind of thing, and I would use those as a teenager. But yeah, there was a almost a familiarity. I remember not long after, I think the year after, I spent the summer working sort of gardening jobs with a friend to save up enough money to buy Rigardi's Golden Dawn, the big blue one at that time. Because I'd in Confessions and stuff, I'd read Crowley's Journey and the Golden Dawn, and that appealed very much. But the funny thing was, when I got hold of the book and I got hold of the rituals in it for the degrees and things, it all seemed very cluttered to me. It all seemed like a lot of it was unnecessary. It was just props and costume and drama dressing. So even then, I kind of created a distilled version that I would work on the astral. And so there was always this other thing of developing from what was there. One of the things I'd always liked about Kenneth Grant's work was that he didn't stand still with Thelema and Crowley's legacy. He kind of took it off into totally different places.
Certainly did.
Which was very different to what the Caliphate were doing then and are probably still doing now, actually. So yeah, at a young age, I'd encountered these things.
I think that, and you said something interesting there that I'd like to touch on, is you said you got into the Golden Dawn system. You were in the Blue Brick, which is what a hell of a book. You start looking into the Golden Dawn workings, and while they are resonant, they're powerful. It's a beautiful set of workings, and obviously modern magic owes a lot to the Golden Dawn and to the OTO orders and some of those older orders from back then, who still survive in some form or fashion. There is a lot of extra fluff to it. It's like when you look at Freemasonry. Freemasonry is beautiful, it's respectable, but there is a lot of costume wearing. There's a lot of added things that is more a psychodrama than it is actual magic or ceremony. And that has its place, absolutely. But like with the Golden Dawn system, there's a lot of things that you're like, all right, well, like I get why you're doing it, but it's just a lot of shit that I don't necessarily need to get to the root result. And it's like I'm looking for results, not cosplay. You know what I mean? And once again, there's nothing wrong with that. But for the folks out there that are like, well, screw you, man. No, there's nothing wrong with that. But there also is like, let's cut to the root of it. And like I love what you said there about Kenneth Grant's work, because as you said, he had major influence from Crawley. He had influence from some of those orders, but he said, you know what, I'm gonna go a completely different way with it. I'm gonna kind of take this to a Typhonian side of things and start a whole new understanding of magic. And once again, it without it, I couldn't imagine where magic would be. There's a lot of people that scoff at Typhonian rites or Grant style workings, and even Berthiaud. These people are so respected and need to be. There's people that scoff at that because they don't really understand it, but it's its own form of incredibly powerful magic, and it's just interesting to watch the trail of how people have interpreted it, to needing the costumes, to some not, to going to whole other landscapes of mind.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think in my own experience at the time as well, another major factor really was sort of, I guess, Gardnerian witchcraft. Okay. There was a work, Doreen Valenti, published around that time, Witchcraft for Tomorrow, which actually had her version of the Book of Shadows in it. And with that, I could see, you had something that was pared down. You've got, lunar rites, and you've got the Saturn rites and things, but it was all pared down in much the way that I felt you needed to. I just felt that once you ride the current, it's you don't need the trappings.
Yes.
But as you say, in some cases they can be helpful, certainly with Masonic rites and things. The actual disciplines involved in people, memorizing chunks of texts for the drama and stuff, in of itself can have a positive influence. But personally, I was always kind of, I guess, down the sort of sorceress route. I very much empathized with what Austin Spare had been doing, and again, having a very kind of, in a way, a simple solution and method. And one of the things about the Voodoo Gnostic tradition that I've more latterly become very much involved with is that you've got the breadth of different subject areas almost. You're not constrained to any one thing. Because as I say, for a long time, even though I was very much influenced by Crowley and his philosophy, I wouldn't have said I was strictly a Thelemite, because I was also very interested by some of the witchcraft stuff and some of the other stuff. Whereas with the Voodoo Gnostic, it is such a melting pot of different things that there's this scope to have that diversity.
I love that, because there's nothing wrong, and I talked to my last guest, Father Barabbas, about this. There's nothing wrong with being a traditionalist or sticking to one specific path or faith or whatever you want to call it. That's admirable, but I have always been myself a syncretic person. I like to bring those syncretic pieces together from different paths, different faiths and theologies that become a melting pot, as you said, to make my path, because everybody should have their path, whether it's shared with other individuals or it's just you alone. It should be yours. It shouldn't just be to follow someone else for following's sake. And as you said, the Voodoo Gnostic workings, that path itself is such a amalgamation of so many different elements that, as I said, some people will scoff at it. Oh, that's not voodoo. Well, it's not supposed to be voodoo. It's a many different things together under a term that is used that has elements of those things, but it has elements of so many more. And I know it's often said in all of the workings of Berthiaud, but people will say, it's too simple. That's not going to work. It's too simple. And it's like, maybe you're thinking too complexly, brother, because sometimes the most simple of things have the biggest effects. And I can tell you from personal experiences, I know some of those very simple workings of his, you read it and you're like, well, okay, that's so ABC, and then you do it and you're like, oh, okay, well, that was more resonant than the 3-hour ritual I did the other night, so something's a little off here. Why don't you tell us a little bit about coming into that world? Obviously, as you said, you were following the works of Crowley, you followed the Golden Dawn and Austin Osman Spare, Kenneth Grant, but at some point in time, you came across the Gnostic Voldoon workbook. Tell us about coming across that and how that impacted your life, because obviously that's been a huge part of things.
Sure. Probably have to go back to the beginning, really, because not long after I sort of found my way, there was a small occult bookshop opened in my hometown called the Ace of Wands, and it was just a lower room of a terraced house, so quite a small room. They would regularly get their front window, have bricks thrown through it at the weekend by folks from the local evangelical church, to the point where they couldn't get insurance for the building and stuff. But for me, it was kind of I became a fixture, the teenage fixture at weekends, and they had all the books that were being published at the time. In the UK, there was a lot by Aquarian Press and Thorson's and Rutledge, Keegan and Paul and Muller and others. Some of those being ones that published Grant. But I always remember the day there was this kind of, I think it was a bluey colour with gold blocking book, the Voodoo Gnostic Workbook. And I flicked through it, and it was this kind of photocopied, Xerox-like, mimeographed-like text. The production looked poor. It looked, and it was very dense and it was very expensive. So I kind of passed it by. And then some years later, I was in New York, Magickal bookshop, and again, it was there, and I had a very similar kind of experience, and ended up coming out with the little red and gold rather, Book of the Law, which was produced around that time. And again, kind of, sidestepped the Voodoo Gnostic Workbook. And it was only really, and I think about 2012 or 2013, when Wiser reprinted it, that I thought, well, now's the opportunity to actually look at it properly. And then very quickly, within probably a 6-month period, it just blew a hole through everything. And as you say, this was facilitated by the Lucky Hoodoo Grimoire, which in many ways is very basic, but in other ways it kind of opens up a connection that, if you've been doing this stuff for many lifetimes and aligned with certain currents, and because the hoodoo are meant to derive from Atlantis, and then in my other works I go back into the interstellar origins of them as well, but essentially it kind of just ignites something, and that was my experience. All of a sudden I was assaulted by a series of visions and very powerful lucid dreams where particular entities and spirits would come and actually basically sit me down and teach me stuff. Some of it, very arcade, some of it kind of pragmatic, like, you should paint stars this way. And I found within about 6 months of all of this, that this person I remember reading about in Cults of the Shadow, as a teenager, Michael Bertio, I was sitting in his apartment in Chicago being initiated. And it was a very surreal sensation, and a very kind of obvious difference of dynamic as well. All of a sudden, all that stuff I'd been working with for decades seemed to just pale and dim in comparison. It didn't produce the kind of results that all of a sudden I found myself in the midst of. And I think it was a kind of reawakening of that connection with the current especially given how fast things happened and how quickly I was sort of involved in the modern manifestations of it.
It is interesting. You said a couple things there I'd like to circle back on. You know, it is an awakening for those who maybe have been here in past lives working similar paths where, you know, it's based on a pre-Diluvian Atlantean civilization. But and to people listening out there might be like, oh God, we're getting spacey. No, it's hard to explain if you're not a part of it. But as Sean explained, the same thing for me. When I came across Bertio's work in a sense of actually reading it. And when I say that is I was aware of the gentleman prior to that, but I really wasn't aware of him. There were some crossing paths and some different things that I read other texts and they mentioned him. He added me on Facebook many years ago and I had no idea who he was. I just knew he wrote books, never checked them out. And then my Facebook got taken down and then I restarted a new one. It's been around for years now. But somehow I came across his work and actually was like, okay, I need to check this out. And I started reading it and it ignited a fire that was so unexplainable, you know, because I'm consuming just so much raw data amongst other books and different practices that I am practicing. And then I come across this and I'm like, what the hell is happening to me right now? There was such a whirlwind in such a short amount of time from opening his work to all these things that would start opening, all these doorways that started, you know, being presented. And it was very, very interesting how it came about. And as you said, when you circle back from other lifetimes to the current, I've talked about this on the show before, it's an awakening unto thyself. You all of a sudden remember things that you can't explain why you remember. And you're like, well, okay, this is weird. I'm starting to the lines are starting to merge and it's not like I fully understand my past lives or things. So I'm getting these blips and pieces that are so realistic that they're not just me making them up. It's not just coming into my mind. I'm starting to see myself in other civilizations and times, and now they're starting to merge with mine. And it's not starting over. You never are learning anything. You're only remembering what you have forgotten. Yeah. And it's what an amazing thing, right? To all of a sudden discover that you're like, I've already known all this. I came back, I went through amnesia again, and now I'm picking right back up where I left off. And that's why some folks in the occult are able to pick up a subject and all of a sudden they excel so quickly. And you're like, how the hell is this person knowing it this quickly? Because it's not their first go ahead. They've already done this. Now they're just launching from the launching pad that they had prior to someone who maybe didn't. So, you know, how was that experience for you all of a sudden realizing like I've been here before? And as your books even say, if you're finding yourself here right now, there's a good chance that you've been here before and that, you know, there's a good part that you were part of the lodge in the past, brothers reigniting. Again, even the Monastery of the Seven Rays talks about that you're here right now because you've been here and we're all just meeting each other again under new skin.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think for myself, my experience was, in a sense, it was quite obvious because, you know, I don't remember a time when this wasn't my path. You know, it wasn't that, you know, a relative died and left a Crowley library, or you know, an older brother introduced me to that guy on the back row of the Sgt. Pepper's album. You know, it was something that was just a part of my being. And you know, William Blake has a quote about, you know, you should never be a slave to another man's system. You should create your own systems. And you know, that was something very much that Spare did, and it's something that, you know, Michael Bertio encourages, even though when you look at his work, it is very dense and covers a wide area of, you know, philosophy, magic, and everything in between. But in a sense, he's always kind of said, you know, take this and use it as it fits yourself and your own work. And one of the things I try and stress in Keys to the Hoodoo Kingdom and the other books is this thing about remembrance and about being able to do that, because, you know, I think I was very fortunate in that, you know, I first kind of woke up so young, and had an appreciation of these things and was able to have them, manifest to me and to reclaim them. And there was a lot of that. I mean, there was early on with the voodoo Gnostic work and the hoodoo. I remember there was some instructions in a dream about recovering my asson, the kind of rattle shaker that is used in traditional voodoo ritual. And very shortly thereafter, I did. And I'd known similar kind of things. I had a friend who had been initiated as Alexandrian witch in the late 70s. And he was always kind of rediscovering artifacts. He would just come up with these things that he'd suddenly managed to find again. And I think it's a key thing. I think there's a part of the self which I align with the T-Bon Ange in the voodoo landscape that is outside the circles of time and lifetimes, but it acts as a kind of library, a kind of archive of your core self and your core work, and so it's able to, once you get it back online, you're able to manipulate time, space to bring back those things you need.
And it's so beautiful because it shows you how expansive systems of magic can be. Because for people listening out there that might be very unfamiliar with Bertio's work, might be very unfamiliar with the Vaudin Gnostic workbook, and those spirits, they hear voodoo and hoodoo and what are you guys talking about? This doesn't sound like what I recognize. No, but at the same time, it is what you know about in a different vein or light, from a different perspective, that is still very resonant. And being able to work with the Hu and Du, which is the pre-Atlantean spirits, and Du are the spirits of the dead. You are working with the different classifications of the voodoo spirits. And as Sean just mentioned, not only can you do it in the sense that you've always heard about, that maybe you don't, haven't researched, but there's also the transcendent world aspect where these spirits can take you to other dimensional landscapes that gets very heady, but it is true astral travel and taking you to other planes of existence that are some beautiful and mesmerizing and just captivating, and some are terrifying. And you can start to blend this, and I think that shows the what's the word I want to use, the love of a great teacher is one that tells you, take my work, use it not as my work, as your work. Take it, transform it into other ways of understanding, into your own practice, and change it. I don't want you to keep it exactly the same. And you're going to have people on both sides of the road. There's people saying, work this to a T, don't ever change a single thing. I don't really resonate with that, because magic is meant to transform. Magic is meant to evolve. And if you're staying in the same way always, you're losing something out of that. And I think Bertio was amazing at that, where he said, I'm going to take these elements, I'm going to bring them together from all over the world. I'm going to create this system. But even with me bringing all these systems together in a syncretic path, this isn't the end all. This is only the seed corn that's planted to grow what's next. Take it and use it. And your work certainly shows that you've done that. And so many other individuals' work show that they do that. Why don't you tell us a little bit more? And I don't want you to expound too much on it, because I know you can't. But why don't you tell us how, obviously working his system and influencing your writing have also led to opportunities such as like the ATOA and the LCN, and some of those deeper levels of work without giving much away. And for folks that don't know, ATOA is the Ordo Temple Orientis Antigua and La Cote d'Ivoire Noire, and it's a system within Vodou Gnosticism that has so many different layers and rungs to it. Do you care to speak a little bit about that?
Certainly. I spoke previously about the sort of the rapid pace of change that going to the heart of the current evoked. And perhaps more than anything, one of those aspects was that, as I say, Michael recognized kind of me for who I am and what I've done, and I became the Grand Master for for Britain, Malaysia, and Australia of Ordo Templi Orientis Antigua and the Couvent Noir. And the organisation, has a history reaching back to Haiti in the 1920s. And it's kind of dual nature. It was originally two orders. The first being more sort of Gnostic, theological in nature. The second being closer to the traditional voodoo of Haiti, along with some of the Hermetic influences and Masonic influences that found their way into that. And so, very quickly, as I say, this complete kind of transition happened, and I found myself in a position where I was helping tutor and mentor others within the order. The order has had quite a tumultuous history. It had recently gone through some changes, and I think also kind of indicative of cultural changes, because the order's very much like the Typhonian order. They're not strictly a teaching order. Originally, the Monastery of the Seven Rays was kind of the teaching outer court of the order. Although with the publication recently of those 4-year papers, that dynamic has changed a little bit, and is less directly related to the work of the orders now. Which I guess is in nature, it's very much like Courtney Willis called it. He spoke about it being technicians of the sacred. And there is this sense in which the order acts as a kind of laboratory or a testing bed. In many of Bertio's writings, he talks about the way in which the body of membership, I think in some cases he's referring specifically to those who are ordained as bishops, but that they act like a kind of distributed network, a massive radionic machine, a magical machine, and that is kind of closer to the nature of the orders than, as I say, it being, a teaching order, or it being, a kind of social gathering. It was one of the things about Grant that always interested me as well, was that he was very adamant that Kenneth Grant, the man, you didn't need to know anything about. You only needed to know about his writings and what's contained in them. So he gave very few interviews. He gave very few kind of, as I say, social gatherings. And I think that's one of the hardest things for a lot of people now to come to terms with. If they're interested in the work of the order, or they're interested in the voodoo Gnostic tradition, that we've kind of got into this society of, it's all about me. I want instant results. I don't want to have to, work that hard for anything. And if you're not instantly recognizing me and giving me accolades and, degrees and initiations and things, then, there's something wrong with you. It's not me. I don't need to put in the work. I'm here. And so, as I say, the nature of the orders is different from many occult orders.
Well, and you said it right there, and I talked, at length about this over the years on this show and some of my other, shows as well, is that we are in truly a age of instant gratification because of the way that we've been programmed. Everything now is at the touch of a fingertip. Every series and show we want to listen to, any podcast, any book is on Audible, or you can find the PDF of it. Or one of the things you mentioned earlier, which I think is not even understood by a modern day anymore, is you were taking Crawley's work and you were writing some of the Libers down by hand so that you had them, because you didn't have access to them only through the library, and you had to return that back to a modern world that they don't even understand that concept. It's like, I don't know, the discipline right there, folks, of getting that pounding it out as quickly as you can, because obviously you have to return it, and then writing it down so you have it by hand is a type of discipline and respect for the work that someone who is able to just jump on Amazon right now and download the Audible version or the Kindle version or order it and have it in 2 days at your doorstep. You will never be able to understand or respect if you don't have that. And we come from that age that everybody wants it, they want it now. And because there's so much at our fingertips, nothing rarely is respected. It is, oh, let me take this course. Oh, that's cool. I'm 5 weeks into this 7-week or 10-week course, but there's this other course. I'm going to jump to that. It's like, but you didn't finish the first one. I know, but this other one's interesting. It's like, well, aren't you trying to actually like master something? Well, yeah, but and then let me look at this book and then that book. And don't get me wrong, we're all guilty of it. I read a shit ton of books. I constantly read just for reading's sake, because I love to read. I love absorbing knowledge. But I, again and again, folks, as you hear me say, discipline is everything. And you have to have that discipline. And everybody wants to just get to the finish line without running the race. And it's crazy. And everybody's about titles anymore. Titles are worth something when earned, and they are respectable, but they only are respectable if earned. So folks that are like, I am X, Y, and Z, A, B, and C, and they're spouting out a million titles to you, but your knowledge is very simplistic. You don't have anything to back up what you're saying. You earned a bunch of useless titles. You know, it's equivalent to me of joining the Satanic Temple or the Satanic Church and sending in your $25 or $35 and them sending you your laminated card. Congratulations, you are now a member. What did that get you? You have a card in your back pocket. It means nothing. And that's the age that we live in, and the hard work just isn't, unfortunately, there anymore. So I can understand that as the reprinting of the Monastery of the Seven Rays 4-year coursework and some of those other things coming out have kind of shifted away from being so connected to the group, because it's like, well, there's stuff to learn here, but you don't need to be a member of the order, because 9 out of 10 chances, if not 10 out of 10, you're not going to fit the order anyway, just because of lack of work ethic in the modern era.
I think that's a pretty good summary. Yeah.
It's a shame. But, I mean, I think that's a good way of weeding out the weak, right? It doesn't take much to get rid of a lot of people. A lot of people come in, they want to do something. You give them first 2 assignments. You're like, here you go. And then wait a few weeks and see how many of that group are still there at the end. And you weed out 80% of them first assignment. And it's like, all right, well, now we give you 3, 4, 5, 6 more assignments. And by the end, you're like, okay, there's 2 left. They might actually have what it takes, but let's give it some more time. And I think that's vital these days, is there has to be a system of checks and balances to just weed out who really doesn't want to be there, because so many people, like I said, 6 months into something are like, okay, I don't want to do this anymore. But you were so passionate about it 6 months ago. Yeah, well, I got distracted by something else. Life is distraction these days.
Yeah, well, it reminds me of 2 things, actually. Crowley's first motto was Pure de Rabo, I will endure. And I've always thought, in terms of dedication and commitment, that's a good one to have, because, you do endure if it's true and it's pure, kind of thing. And the other thing was, I always remember Israel Regardie, I can't remember if it was in Pomegranates or somewhere else, but he was saying about, applicants for the Golden Dawn should basically have psychotherapy or some kind of psychological review before they consider joining. And if anything, with the Voodoo Gnostic path, I think that's very true. I mean, I have known a number of students who have come unstuck because of that. I've even had cases with one of my books you mentioned earlier, the Grimoire of ZAL, where it basically just ripped open cracks in people's psyche, to the point where by the time I got to publishing it, I added a warning at the beginning of it, and there's a version of it in the graphic novel adaptation as well, the illustrated Grimoire of ZAL, because for some people I found, it really could kind of go up the weak spot. And again, it's kind of it feeds a little bit into the kind of spooky Kenneth Grant left-hand path stuff, but you know, there's a reason. A lot of these forces you're dealing with, a lot of the night side stuff, a little like the Archons, is quite alien to our understanding and our ideas of normality and the like. You know, I mean, there's the Grant bit about, you know, some of the night side tunnels. The only way you can get through them and survive stuff is by basically, you know, adopting monstrous forms that are just as monstrous as those you're going to encounter. And so, you know, that's kind of very different from your average, even, you know, a lot of your average occult stuff. And so there is a, you know, an aspect of danger and jeopardy that people also have to be conscious of. And, you know, if you're jumping into something because, you know, hey, it seems sexy and cool and Baron Samedi-like, as Grant Morrison found out when he was working on the Invisibles and incorporating some of this stuff, it can very quickly get a hold of you. And if you don't, I mean, one of the things I discovered early on was in traditional voodoo, you have the petro spirits that are kind of like the darker aspects of things. So like with Legba, this Carfor, and all these other kind of mirror spirits. And a lot of it historically comes out of the fact that they descend from some of the spirits in Africa that were in the sort of more warlike tribes and such like. And so they've got this darker aspect to them. You find quite a few of them in Santiago as well. But I found early on, when encountering some of these, that, you know, the kind of traditional methods you're honed in don't work. I mean, I was trying to kind of, you know, bind them and chain them and constrain them with this holy word and that holy word and, you know, this, that, and the other. And it just had no effect whatsoever. It was only really when I gave up and went, okay, how bad can this be? That I found that actually you have to work on a kind of relationship with them rather than you know, I'm the master here, I'm the magician standing with the wand.
I think what you just said is huge, because these are forces that most people are not prepared to work with, and it will cause people to go insane or suicidal or murderous or any of the like, because you're dealing with aspects that, as Sean said, are so incredibly alien to anything that we can understand until we encounter them, that you can make up ideas of what it might be all day long, but when you find out what it is, it's quite different. And, you know, as you use the term the Invisibles from Grant, that's really what it is we think like, oh, okay, so I'm going to encounter monstrous forms and alien-like beings that are terrifying, things of nightmares. Well, yes, but here's the thing, guys. What's even more terrifying than a just horror-ish monster is something that is invisible and can take on any form that it wants to. And it's going to take on different forms that you either need to see or that it wants to show you. And that's not its true form. That's only what it's allowing you to see. It's alien to forms. And I work heavily within the Sitharakri and Klepothic side of things, and there are horrors, absolutely, that you encounter that if you are not prepared for, you really can't be, but if you're not at least somewhat prepared for, it will drive you to insanity, and it'll cause some major disruptions in your life. It will fracture the ego, it'll fracture the psyche a little bit, but it's our job to have to then take those cracks and not treat them as damaged goods, to actually let that be an expansion of the mind as it cracks, and then heal it over, and then your mind expands. But we need to understand, as Sean said, you're not binding it with angelic names. You're not doing the traditional ceremonial magic in certain realms of the occult, because none of that does anything to it. You have to find a different way to work these systems and these beings. I think there's a certain beauty, though, in traveling these worlds and these tunnels. That's the basis of our other show, Caniculum Obscuritatis, is the obscure tunnels, because there's so much fruit in those dark tunnels, but be careful what you sink your teeth into. Now, looking at, I just lost it. Let me pull it back up. For some reason, my computer just did something weird. While I'm trying to find this question I just had up on the screen, one of the other things I think is so incredible is if you look back at histories that really, we talked about a few tonight, when we look at the Golden Dawn era, we look how much influence the Golden Dawn had on so many different people, from Waite to Crawley, Mathers, and Regardi, and all these folks who then went on to form other systems. You know, the OTO was already present, but, you know, Crawley's OTO changed that to that, you know, leading into other systems as well. There's certain areas of time, guys, that you can look and see how much it's changed everything to come. And that Golden Dawn 1888 formation was able to really wellspring into a lot of other things. And one of the other ones we spoke of tonight, which was when Michael Bertio was initiated into these systems in Haiti, that was a wellspring of so many things happening in Haiti at that time. When you look at the French and you look at the Ellis Cohen and you look at Martinism and you look at the Masonry that was going on and you look at how some of those lineages took from the Haitian Vodun and you look at how that ended up forming his lineage and became, you know, Vodun Gnosticism and led to LCN and Atoa and other systems, the monastery. It's another one of those systems that needs recognition. If you guys are not familiar out there and it's something that sparks your interest, I would advise looking into it, because there's an endless amount of substance there to dive into and learn about that maybe you're just not familiar right now. But there's just those certain moments in time that you can track so many things back to. Another one would be, unfortunately, would be the Atlantic slave trade, when so many were taken from Africa and brought to Brazil and brought to Portugal, and how that would spawn so many other religious faiths and practices, from Palamayombe and Palacambisa to Umbanda and Kimbanda to Santeria and Ocho, and so many other other paths would spawn from these certain well springs in time. It's really quite beautiful and amazing. Another thing I want to captivate on or jump back to was, you said it, and I've mentioned that exact thing, Sean, on this show multiple times, that Israel Regardi had talked about needing to do a psychological evaluation either prior to your fully diving into a practice or along the path. And because, you know, what happens is that God complex. As you start to really come into contact with forces, as you really start to have experiences, what should happen is a humbling of yourself. Not a full expulsion of the ego, but a major dissolving of the ego, and you understanding what its purpose is, but becoming something beyond that. But for other people, it's the opposite. It's an inflation of that ego. And I am a god. I am the one. I am special. And it's like, no, you're just doing what we all were inherently born with capabilities to do. You're just discovering that you can do it. So psychoanalytical evaluation is very, very important to all of us. There's times, as Sean mentioned, working these tunnels, I have even been full batshit crazy during it. I'm like, I think I'm starting to lose my mind. I'm like, I'm going crazy. I need to find a way to cleanse myself out of that, to bring it back. Because if I don't do something and I just keep going, I'm going to snap. And by knowing when to do that and healing that, and like I said, those cracks, not damage, but an expansion, then you grow from your practice rather than folding from it. So, you know, just some side notes to everyone listening out there, as this is obviously a teaching and a learning show. Look into those different systems, look into those seeds that grew so much in the occult realm. And we're talking to a gentleman tonight who certainly is an expansion of those and has done quite a lot in that arena. Talking about Typhonian rites, I want to jump into here. When you say throughout your work, Amenta, are you describing an underworld realm, an initiatory state, or an ancient psychic geography?
Essentially, it's the underworld as an interface to a psychic geography. Certainly with Typhonian Rites of Amenta, there's an emphasis on the kind of Egyptian aspects of it, and ways in which in the Typhonian tradition they were addressed. One of the key things I think about Kenneth Grant and his approach to things And something that always struck me was that, when you look at Crowley's work, aside from, there's two things. One thing is, I think people very often forget just how dedicated as a literary figure Crowley was. His dedication to writing these works of prose, fiction, poetry, drama, alongside the magical aspects, is there. For those who sort of think he was just running along this occult course. But equally, the other aspect of Crowley's work, which I think was played down by the Caliphate and ramped up by Grant, and I think is fundamental to it, is that Crowley's work was on a basis of his interaction with Aiwass, with Amalthea, and Lam, and these were all, however you want to class them, non-human entities, prey to human intelligences, and certainly with Aiwass and the Book of the Law and the rest, it was fundamental to Crowley's progression, and that's why I think with Grant, and with the Voodoo Gnostic work as well, the core things are about those relationships and those interfaces, and working from that rather than any idea of what things already look like. You have to be guided by some of these entities rather than just your own understanding of things.
I think that's big. I think one of the other problems that a lot of people face today is the understanding of why and how to work with these spirits, because when you're working with spirits, a lot of times we've made the funny analogy of like the Pokemon thing where everybody wants to work with everything, right? You just want to work with 50 different spirits, and it's like, well, why do you want to work with so many things? It's like, well, because I want to experience all of them. And it's like, but what is your gain? What is the purpose of wanting to work with them? And there needs to be an understanding that you don't need a million friends. You only need a few really good ones. And that's the same type of understanding with spirits. When you're working with spirits, it's okay to work over years with different things, absolutely. But if you're working with one for a week and then you just discard it, and then you work with another spirit or intelligence and then you just discard it, yeah, you can have the notch in your belt once again. And that's an ego stroke right there. That's a self-masturbatory act of egoism right there. You're saying, oh, I worked with 50 different spirits. Once again, I have 25 different titles. What has it done for you? Nothing. Okay, well then what the hell's the point? To be able to work with a spirit or intelligence and then actually be working with it, to gain understanding in it, as Sean just said, it giving you how to be worked and what to do. Think of how integral working with Lamb was to Crowley. What came of that interaction and that gnosis and understanding, that if it was just like, oh, cool, hi, nice to meet you, that was a cool rite that we did, all right, on to the next one, it would have changed the absolute foundation of magical history. If the Book of the Law wouldn't have come out, think of how many individuals and lodges and practitioners have been influenced and changed by that specific work, and it wouldn't have happened. So it's pivotal that we understand when we're working with something, work with it. You don't just spend 10 minutes, don't just spend one night and then discard it, because there's no point in that. That's all fine and dandy if you're just doing the quick, I need money, fame, glory, love, sex, whatever, and you're doing a quick rite with something. But if you're still doing that years into your practice, you're not a real practitioner. You are a weekend dabbler, still doing very petty, squabbled things on the side. It doesn't, that's not practicing. Practicing is finding out the depths of understanding beyond what we can currently conceptualize, and finding it out from these beings who are very expansive in knowledge, and them teaching you to help you write books, to help you formulate new systems of magic that, once again, will shape your life. But it won't happen unless you are truly interfacing with these intelligences. Now, what separates a Typhonian current from other left-hand path systems, and how it changes the operator itself?
That's a very good question. And I think I was having something like this conversation with a group last night, actually, because obviously at the end of the day, labels don't really count for anything. You know, a lot of it is our own filters again and our own interpretation, because the underlying forces are the same things. You know, I obviously with the Typhonian slant, you know, it came around very much because of wanting to differentiate themselves from the OTO of California, and so there's, you know, the moniker kind of stuck. I mean, Grant does he referred to it in places early on, and then actually as, you know, a label, and then I think, you know, the Typhonian aspect is really tied into the type of work, the type of understanding of these things that is very different from the kind of, you know, the traditional polemic outlook. You know, people often complain about some of Grant's leaps of logic and some of his gematria, but I think he understood, as I do, that in many ways you use all systems available to you to try and express or, you know, hack cracks in the reality of things. And so if a calculation is kind of incorrect and yet it takes you down a different road of understanding or a deeper understanding of something, then it's, you know, it's not necessarily illegitimate. And that kind of ties into one of the important practices I think, you know, magicians and occultists should maintain, and that's the magical record, because quite often you need a wide span of time to understand how things link up and how diverse manifestations of things actually tie together. And again, that goes back to the notion of former lives and activity as well, because you start to see how things tie in. I mean, I spoke about, you know, when I was a teenager and first came across a lot of this stuff through the Ace of Wands bookshop. I met some Thelemites of the Typhonian persuasion. I was involved in a Typhonian power cell called the Nephisis Arachna Power Zone. This was around kind of about 984. And so I was closely involved with them and the work they were doing. And we had a public, like a zine publication, one called TNT and another called Ignitor, that we put out at the time. And then only in recent years did I actually meet up again with the guy that had been leading that power zone. We got talking, and obviously I was talking to him about my voodoo gnostic experiences and sort of where I'd gone with that and what I was involved with. And he sort of just sat there and smiled and went, yeah, we had a charter with the OTOA then, and we had some stuff going on. And he says, I'm really not surprised that you were, you know, after all these years, you become more closely involved with it, to the point where he actually gifted me all of his magical artifacts and
oh
books.
wow!
So there's the first edition of Images and Oracles of Hostage Spare. Gave me his copy of. I for years I tried to get hold of that because they only printed a limited run initially. And in fact, when Fulger republished it some years ago, I made sure I had several copies. But this one is a first edition, and it is subtly different. You know, the paper and some of the ink and stuff. So, you know, again, it's nice to have these kind of recognitions of the work you're doing. You know, he was obviously very, very clear about that. And that goes back as well, I think, to something you were saying earlier about, you know, titles and degrees and things. And, you know, my thought is always, yeah, these things are fine. As I say, I personally have had various initiations and ordinations and things. But what do you do with it the next day? How do you use it to better serve the forces you're engaged with, and be your fellow man essentially, or woman, because the things of themselves don't mean anything. I mean, I turn around now and I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 gold frame certificates on my wall which acknowledge various things, but they don't really mean anything. Their value is in how they connect me to certain aspects of the current, and how that can then be used, as I say, in service.
No, that's it, because you can have someone with no certificates, no titles, and then someone with all the titles, all the certificates, and have the same level of knowledge. And when you speak to them, truth just has a tendency to resonate in you. And that person with absolutely no titles can speak to you, and you're just blown away by them. Man, you were speaking such truth to me. You're changing something inside of me. But he's just a no one, right? But then you have the guy with all the titles speaking a lot, and you're like, I didn't really get anything from that. It is nice though. Like you said, initiation should be a stage that changes you. It should be a death unto yourself, and then an awakening into the next phase, if you were using it properly. But if it's just, I got the title, woo, like I got the certificate, and it's like, yeah, but nothing in you changed from you 4 months ago to you 4 months, or 3 months after your initiation. You're the exact same person, same mindset, same way of living. Nothing has changed. Then you might have initiated, I'm giving the winky figures here, you might have initiated, but you didn't absorb the initiation. Because if you absorb it, it will change you. It will kill something inside of you and awaken something else. And I think a lot of people are so focused on the title, so focused on the ritual of the initiation and getting through it, that they never actually sit with it.
Yeah, and I draw parallels from professional life as well, because often people have career paths, and you have lofty career positions that this is what you want to aspire to. You want to become head of the business or whatever. And very often, and I've had the experience myself, you get to that place, you get to the top of the mountain, and you look around and you think, well, this ain't so great. And actually, it wasn't worth the sacrifice. All I've done is put myself in a place where there are more demands upon me than I really want, and I am less free than I would want to be. And so I guess it's perspective. You have to, like most things, keep these things in perspective.
You do, because you might climb to the top of the mountain, but now you're above the skyline. So now all you see is clouds. It ain't a very pretty view, but down below, hundreds of yards down the mountainside, it's a gorgeous view. And like you said, the purpose of our magic and these initiations and our growth spiritually is to make life more smooth, more easy, in the sense of a beautiful life. Doesn't mean it's easier that you don't have responsibility. We have to make that distinction, because to truly maintain your practice, it is day in and day out. It's not a weekend warrior type gig. It is a discipline, as anything of any worth is. But through that discipline and through your path, life should become easier. It should become something beautiful, that you're seeing the view, whether you're halfway up the mountain or you've reached your, providential, peak. That's up to you. But sometimes, like Sean said, reaching the peak isn't always what it's cracked up to be. Now you're like, I have a ton of responsibilities. My life actually kind of sucks right now because I'm not happy. But you reached the title, right? You got the title. You can float that around at parties. I'm such and such. Well, that's cool, man. How is your life? Because I would rather be the guy with no titles and happy than the guy with all the titles and miserable. And I think most people would probably agree to that. So,
and it's very true. And I can't, again, going back to my teenage self that was, in this very little colloquial bookshop in an old house. And I observed the occultists that came in, because I was the young kid in there. Everybody else was older than me. Everybody, and they were in different traditions and things. But one thing that struck me was a lot of them did not seem to have very good lives. They did not seem to be enjoying happiness. And I kind of thought at the time, and it's kind of a judgmental thing looking back on it, but I kind of thought, what is the point of this magic they're involved with if it isn't bringing them happiness, if it isn't enriching their lives? And for a long time that was one of my measures. It was and I found that really it was the cornerstone thelemic thing of if you know yourself and you know what it is you want to do and what you want to be and who you are, you do your will, you know your will. Actually, yes, the universe and all those factors fall into place around you. It can't act any other way. It's the true state of being. Often, and again, it goes back to the Archonic thing. We're divorced from a happier state, a more harmonious state. And the closer we get to it, simply by acknowledging our own self and our own worth, it starts to fall in line. And that was one of the things I found about practical magic from that point on. It was sort of, I didn't really have to apply too much effort. The things that were needed would appear.
Yep. And that's it, is if you align your vibration and your frequency, to a higher state, then you become happier. And as you do, things fall into line because like attracts like. So if you are truly happy, then the things come to make you happy, and you to make those things happy, and you keep building up. But when you put yourself, folks, at a lower vibration, you're going to pull in shit to your life. When you feel like shit, when you think like shit, you're going to get shit. But when you feel happy and content, then the things come without you having to even really ask for it. It's the ancient belief in magic as well. As you're very experienced in ceremonial or ritual magic, there comes a point, because you're so connected, and that's really any path, that you don't even really need to do the operation anymore. It just happens before you do it. You start to plan the operation of what it is you're going to do and what your end is for something maybe you need in life. And then you end up getting it 2 days before you do the operation. Now, that doesn't mean that you don't still do it, because it is the song and dance of celebration to bring it into this world. Yes, you received it, but we have to understand that there are multiple layers of reality in the worlds out there. And it happened in another, which came here, but now you need to do it here so that it's cemented in the other, and you work the two side by side. But it's funny when people start to experience it. They're like, things keep happening before I've actually had to ask for it. I'm like, well, then it means your magic's working, brother. Keep doing it. That's the whole point. The whole point of magic is to not need it, but to always have it and to always use it, because it becomes ingrained in your life. Now, with the last little section of show here, I think it's only fitting. There's so much more I had for you, Sean, but I never get through them. I had enough questions that we could do like a 6-hour episode, but obviously that's not realistic. I want to end this last portion with you as my last guest here with how my path started. We're going to talk about Hekate for a little bit, because she was so pivotal to my life in shaping exactly what we just spoke about, changing things to a point where I started to see, live, breathe, feel, and be different. And as I was, those things that I always wanted or needed started to come into my life properly. And I've been able to work and build from that ground up ever since, many, many years later. So I think it's only proper to end this show where my journey began. Let's talk about Hekate, Infernal Faces. Your title, Infernal Faces of Hekate, implies masks. What does it mean when a goddess shows a face instead of a form?
Well, essentially, that notion came from some dream workings where I was in a kind of ancient landscape. And at various crossroads, there were these statues. Some were kind of like almost kind of pan, but they were a head, and shoulders, and kind of no arms, and just a torso, and the rest of the body kind of thing. So they were a bit abstract in a way. But there was also one Hekate with the 3 faces. and that kind of led into that work and to the connection between a lot of the, I guess, the witchcraft lunar stuff I'd done many years ago, and continues to surface in my artwork of these kind of lunar priestess and goddess figures, and it drove that. So in a way, it was almost kind of literal masked in a statue, but the statue was in a place you wouldn't normally find them.
That's awesome. I love that. What would you say to practitioners who want Hecate's power and to learn from her, but fear the costs of that truth? Because I feel often too many times in life, people want something, but they just don't want to take or do what it takes to get there. So what would you say to someone who wants that power, but just can't face what it takes?
I think like many things, you've got to look at what your motivations are, why you're doing it, why you want it. There might be easier ways. There might be, as you say, less costly ways. Because certainly, Hekate falls into the realms of some of these hetero spirits and things, in that, it's not an easy ride and it's not one without cost. And so I think you have to be very careful about what it actually is you really want, and is this the best way and best time to be doing it?
100%. And you just mentioned something that goes very nicely into the next question. You mentioned there being some similarity there to Hekate and the Petro spirits of the Loa. Does Hekate represent a single intelligence in your view, or is it more of a composite current of crossroads spirits?
I think ultimately, going back to something I said earlier, I think all of these characters, these entities, are essentially masks of something quite different. I think there are forces or energies that they manifest in this way, or they show themselves to us in this way to make it easier for us to work with them and understand them, and for them to interact with us. So I think they can manifest in different ways in different cultures, in different forms. There's a form of Erzulie Dantor, that I think in many ways is very similar to the sort of energies of Hekate, and there are other entities in other traditions that are similar. And this is why, in a sense, I think you have to recognize the kind of universality of these things and not be entirely constrained by whatever form you're working with.
And I've always resonated that with your work, because I think very similar that, everything we work with are the deific masks of divinity and of the devils, whatever side of the road you want to fall on. And if there even is a road, because folks, the road only exists because you make it. As we talked about earlier, you create your reality. There's nothing that has any value to it except the value you place. So you define those lines. But there are these deific masks, and some are of divinity and some are of the devils. And you work with them in ways that we understand them in different aspects and of different archetypes, so that we can go through these trials and go through these ordeals and grow from them, so we can reconnect ourselves back to our original source. And as Sean said, it's all coming from the wellspring. The wellspring just happens to have a lot of little tributaries that branch off of it, and those are those masks, which is really, really beautiful. What is the role of terror in genuine Hekatean initiation, or really any initiation? What do you find is the value, which is kind of a strange question, I know, but what do you find is the value of terror and fear within practice?
I think, in a sense, it goes to something, again, you spoke about earlier, and that's respect. I think it's very easy for us to forget what we're dealing with. We think we may have read this or done that, or have a right or an ability to be where we are and doing what we're doing and engaging with what we are, when actually a lot, as I say, a lot of these things, they can be fickle. They can be, trickster-like. They could be sometimes downright malicious. And so, also, I think it's the gravitas. It's the, going back to respect. It's like in the Masonic cases where you've got, a masked, blindfolded applicant, and you've got a sword placed against them. It's like the Golden Dawn with the initial oaths, or even with the Second Order when the Christian Rosicrucian rite. It's to remind us that actually, in the scheme of things, we're not really big players. There are far more powerful and sometimes dangerous forces at play, and every now and then we need to be reminded of it. And I think that's why.
No, that was a perfect answer for it. Thank you. Last one on Hekate, and I have a couple of just personal questions I want to ask you about, your work, and then we'll wrap this up, brother. I appreciate your time. Last one on Hekate. If Hekate is a threshold, as many people look at her as, what are the 3 most common things you think that people were asked to leave behind before they cross that gate?
I think one of the main things with Hekate, one of the reasons in this incarnation I'm not really in a good position to get too close to, but there is a very definite female relationship aspect to her, and very often, a lot of her adherents are people, are women who have gone through very traumatic life experiences. And it's only Hekate that really can give them the strength to persevere against that. So it's that relationship.
That's huge, because the truth behind that is very profound, brother, because I would agree. There's a lot of different feminine aspects of spirits that one can work with. And sure, there's going to be some that find that salvation in other feminine spirits. But what you'll find time and time again with women that work with Hekate, she is the one spirit, as you said, that was able to help them through abuse, through all kinds of horrific things that maybe have happened to them and traumatic experiences in their life. She is the motherly figure. She does, not that she's all cuddling and hugs. No, she is a little bit of both sides. She is going to be loving and endearing and teach them how to find that love within themselves again and rise themselves up and to take their throne, but also roll with an iron fist as well and teach them how to find that strength to not ever let this happen again. And I've seen that time and time again within the work that I do, how much of a role she has played in bringing people back to themselves that had that peace stolen, either due to life or due to someone else's hands. So that's very, very resonant there. Now, last couple questions and we will wrap this up. When you create, do you feel that you're channeling, building, or excavating something that already exists?
Pretty much, yes. And sometimes it can be difficult because, for example, early on, some of the vision cycles and things I experienced were of a very kind of interstellar, almost Star Wars kind of scenarios. And at the time, I just found it so vivid, but equally, I thought the only way I'm really going to be able to express this is as science fiction, and that's why the 3 Leng mythos books are kind of written as science fiction. But also, over time, what happened was that some of the core parts of them, the characters in them, it became clear that they were more than just that, and so they kind of seeped into the purely, non-fiction occult writing, to the point when most recently my books, The Magic of ZAL and the Tarot of ZAL, have really been a crossover kind of thing, where there's no longer any distinguishing between one and the other. And so I think, and the thing is, it's even with the experiences of writing some of the Leng Mythos material, I was more an observer than the writer. You know, this stuff was going on, and even to the point where rationally there was a character I wanted to kill off from a narrative perspective, you know, fiction perspective. And several times I wrote them into situations where they were dying. They weren't getting out alive. That was it. I was making sure. And they found a way out every time. It's to the point where I'm just like, no, forget it. You get on with it. You do what you want to do. And, you know, that was just kind of one example of where it was very hard to actually feel like, yeah, I'm just sitting here creating all this stuff, because they kind of push back against it.
I love that, though. I mean, it's interesting how, as you said, it's kind of pouring out of you, and you're watching it come to creation. And obviously, you're very much a part of that creation process, but it is something other than you. And as you even try to take the reins and say, okay, I'm going to lead this the way I think, it's like, well, not quite. You're very much a part of it, Sean, but we're going to kind of steer it the way we need it to be, because for whatever reason, even sometimes unbeknownst to us, it has to hit the public eye in a very certain way that plants seeds in a certain way that we don't see a lot of times. You can't see the forest from the trees. So a lot of times we're like, well, okay, I guess that's the way it's supposed to be, but why? Maybe you'll see it a year from now, 5 years from now. Maybe you'll never see it in your lifetime. But it goes back to that grimoire that you mentioned. The jotting down of your notes is essential, because it might not make sense a day later, a week later, a month later. It could be 8 years later. You go back and read a passage and all of a sudden realize, oh my God, something that happened back then correlates to exactly what's going on now. And you're like, oh, wow, I never seen it at that time. Well, no, you couldn't see it at that time. But things were shaping even then into where you are now, all those years later. And then it reminds you of a dream 3 years prior to today. And you're like, this has always been in the plan. And I've only was given small fragments at a time to finally see the bigger picture. And I think our hope for all of us is that before we go, we can stand back and see what that bigger picture is. And sometimes we do, sometimes we don't, but it happens in fragments, it happens in stages. And I think, as long as you said earlier, as long as we're riding the wave properly, it all comes together the way that it really should. So thank you for that. And last question, and then I want you to tell us where we can check out your work. One of the things we didn't talk about tonight, we talked about some of your books, we talked about your practice and your thoughts. We talked about you being a channel or medium for your inspiration and for your writings and things and drawings. But we didn't talk about music. Last question here I want to ask is, what role does sound or music play in your personal magic that words alone just can't seem to accomplish?
That's a very good question. And again, time-wise, sort of wanting to create sonic things has been with me probably from around the age of 13 or 14 when I first learned to play guitar. Taught myself, but even with that, there was kind of links to the esoteric, because my biggest inspiration for wanting to play guitar was Jimmy Page, and of course, there's all the connections Page had with Crowley, with his Equinox bookshop he ran at one point, obviously owning Bonskine House for a while, and musically there were other places like, and probably apt to this evening, a band called Fields of the Nephilim.
Yes,
I drew great inspiration from at the time, but unfortunately, probably about the time I discovered them, they disbanded, and I thought never to rise again. But fortunately, I had an opportunity to see that happen. But yeah, music was always something. Again, with the writing, I think that I always had songs and stuff in my head, and was wasn't always really able to get them out as well as I could. Written things, I always kind of veered more towards the writing and stuff. But over time, that changed, and I got more involved with it. I created a few musical projects, one called Gothic, which was kind of 1980s goth style band. And more recently, I've been producing and working on a new incarnation of a band called Jupiter Loop that 20 years ago I'd created, working a lot with samplers at the time and samples and things. And more recently, I've kind of revisited and re-released some of their the early albums of the project, and I've been working on a number of others with kind of techno and trip hop influences. And in fact, probably the last couple of months, I've been heavily involved on the music side of things, doing those albums and doing some others. There's a new Gothic Live one I'm working on at the moment, getting that finished.
No, I've seen your recent updates and posts on that. That's wonderful, and I love the fact that your influences aren't limited. You don't believe in putting up those barriers that wall you in. So many people want to define themselves with the walls that are around them. You know, this is our area. You know, and that's great, but that can be very limiting at the same time. And I love the fact that you're saying I'm pulling influences from every direction and bringing it in, because what speaks to you speaks to you. And I think that's important, to bring in different elements and to give something that one song can be very different than another. One project can be very different than another, but it gives ways of speaking your truth, because our music is that. I'm a musician myself, have been for a long time, and my music is a language into itself. And it's, you know, whenever we start limiting ourselves, that's exactly what we do. So I love to see all the different things you've been putting out, obviously on the music front, and with everything else, from like I said, the comics and you know, fictional writings to the occult writings to everything that you're involved in. Quite the busy man, quite the accomplished individual, and it has been an honor over the years to follow your work. I do want to give you a chance real quick before I do the outro here to tell us where we can check out your work and any last messages you'd want the fans to know.
Sure. So SeanWoodward.com is my main personal site. So that's got a lot of the updates, things going on. ZOSHouse, ZOSHouse.com is my publisher site. So again, most of the work I'm involved with, and also other projects. So there's the Esoteric book series, Tum Zantorum, where I bring together contemporary practitioners and give them a platform for showcasing their work. I'm currently working on volume 6 of that at the moment, which was meant to be finished this month, but is kind of getting a little bit delayed. But yeah, ZOSHouse.com has got links to, as you say, the books, the graphic novels, the music, the tarot decks. I've got several tarot decks, both Voodoo, Gnostic, traditional, and otherwise. And there's a I Ching hexagram deck in there as well, because I'd been wanting to. There used to be one in print many years ago. It kind of went out of print, and I thought I'll create my own. It's a lot easier.
I love that. You heard it, folks. I truly ask all of you listening out there who are listening live and will listen after the fact, check out Sean's sites. Check out the work he's done, because as he said, there's so much, from reading to the tarot decks to the music and everything in between. There's no shortage of good entertainment and things to find for yourself and to learn. So please make sure you check that out. I want to apologize for any of the folks listening out there this evening who maybe were trying to leave messages. I was wondering halfway through the show, but there wasn't much I can do once I'm live. The comments weren't coming in. So I was checking my phone and looking, and there was comments coming in on other platforms. And weirdly enough, they didn't come over, which is the first time this season that we just have no comments coming over. Maybe for some reason, as we talked about the spiritual funny things, maybe they wanted this last episode to just be conversation and not to be distracted by anything else. So if you did leave comments, I apologize. Hello to all of you. Thank you to all of you. And I have two things I want to say. We're going to go ahead and finish out the outro for Sean, and then I have a personal message for all of you. So Sean, obviously, thank you for joining me for what is, without exaggeration, one of the most significant episodes that I've ever recorded. Your work stands at the crossroads of art and gnosis, beauty and terror, poetry and power. And I know I'm not alone when I say that the worlds you've built don't merely exist on paper. They open doors to the mind, to the soul, and to the unseen, as we've discussed here tonight on this episode. To everyone listening, thank you for spending this time with us. If you want to dive deeper into Sean Woodward's work, make sure that you seek out his different books and projects. You have ARCHONIX, you have Typhonian Rites of Amenta, Keys of the Hoodoo Kingdom, the Grimoire of ZAL, Erzulie of the Deep, the Infernal Faces of Hekate, and so much more. Because these aren't just books, they are keys, as the Keys of Hoodoo gives you in the title. And to Sean, brother, thank you again. It has truly been an honor.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, guys. One last thing I want to say here and present to you is before we end this episode, I do want to speak directly to every listener who has walked with me through this strange and sacred journey. Knights of the Nephilim is ending, yes. After 7 years, this is the final chapter. And not only that, this is also the end of all of my shows, all 5 of them. Across every series I've created, we've reached 233 episodes. And if you would have asked me 7 years ago if I thought that would be the case, no. And interestingly enough, I looked up a statistic of all the people who have ever started a podcast. What percentage reaches over 230 episodes? I was truly humbled when it came back with a response that less than 1% of all podcasters to ever start reached the 200 marker. That puts me in a very unique category. And I know of some other great shows that are in that same category, and I'm amongst some great people. And I am humbled and honored to be able to have reached that marker. That number carries weight to me because it represents time. It represents commitment. It represents late nights, early mornings, and that fire inside me that refuses to let the mysteries die and refuses to let the mysteries die within you, because without your support, I wouldn't be here. This show was never just entertainment. It was a lantern carried into the woods and a signal sent out into the dark. And sometimes I wondered if anyone would even hear it, but you certainly did. To everyone who listened, shared an episode, sent a message, left a comment, argued in good faith, or even just hated watching with curiosity, you were part of the current that kept this alive. And to every guest who stepped into this space with me, thank you. Truly, thank you for bringing your voice, your mind, your courage, and your truth. What we built here wasn't just a podcast. It was an archive of living ideas, a map of the hidden roads and paths, a ritual of questions. And now it is time for silence. But listen closely, because this is important. Endings are not always deaths. Sometimes they are sealings, closings. Sometimes they are the moment that work stops being spoken and starts being embodied. So if you've gained anything from these 7 years, if something in you just woke up, if you started walking your own path more honestly, then the mission was accomplished. I'm stepping away with gratitude, truly. Not because I have nothing left to say, but because it's time to live the next chapter, not narrate it. From the bottom of my heart, thank you for giving your time to this show, to all of my shows. Thank you for walking these corridors with me. Thank you for being a part of this strange brotherhood of seekers. This has been Knights of the Nephilim. And for the final time, good night, goodbye, and keep the fire burning. I am Frater Crow, signing out. Ave Noctis.